For 20 years, we've been creating innovation in the CX industry, and now we're seeking out brilliant new perspectives on CX you just won't find anywhere else. I'm Richard Owen. Welcome to the CX Iconoclast. In this episode of the CX Iconoclast podcast, I'm welcoming Tey Bannerman to the show. Tey is a McKinsey partner focused on deploying AI in large enterprises to improve customer retention and growth problems, so pretty much right at the center of the customer AI universe. Tey likes to emphasize that AI could solve real human problems rather than just serve as a technological novelty, and he's pretty critical of the reflexive use of AI for cost-cutting and job elimination, instead urging companies to prioritize long-term value creation and enhanced customer experience. Hear, hear. In this interview, he shares a compelling case study of a B2B payments company that successfully shifted from cost-cutting orientation to a customer-centric strategy, using predictive analytics to reduce churn. He's also highlighting the importance of engaging frontline employees in AI design and adoption, a critical lesson that I think we all need to learn. Our conversation moves on to address the dual challenges of employee resistance and leadership skepticism. Tey notes that fear of job losses and poorly designed tools can truly undermine adoption unless employees are engaged as co-creators. At the executive level, the challenge is often a cultural reliance on instinct over data, especially when it comes to dealing with predictions. He advocates for a balanced approach where leadership combines intuition with data to scale better decision-making. And he does give us one really great quote. Predictive data gives leaders scale. Intuition alone simply can't reach 100,000 customers. Hear, hear. Enjoy the conversation. Tey Bannerman, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's dive straight in, because I think we have a lot to talk about in terms of what your perspective is, and also by implication some of the perspectives McKinsey holds on the whole topic of artificial intelligence. One of the things that you talked a lot about, which I think will resonate with a lot of people here, is that the objective ultimately of artificial intelligence is going to be to serve humanity by solving real business needs, right? Address human concerns rather than simply, be interesting for its own sake. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that, how you see that as a topic?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good opening question. I think if I just think about technology in general and the path that technology has taken, I think historically you've had technology that's been released or that's been developed that's interesting, but doesn't serve a real purpose in terms of humans having a problem that needs solved, an opportunity that was latent. And I think if you just carry that forward, AI is the same. It's another technology, albeit a very powerful one, but the companies, the products that succeed are going to be the ones where ultimately consumers say, I need this, I'm going to use this. And the ones that fail are the ones that, that when nobody uses them. And I think that goes for, whether it's an internal tool or platform that a company is bringing in, or something that's a consumer product. And so I don't think that stance is revolutionary. I think it's just us refreshing that in the age of AI and in the current hype cycle that we're in.
Don't you worry that the opposite turns out to be true in terms of tech? I mean, 20 years ago, did people say, hey, we need a better ad serving engine because I really want to be served more advertisements, or I'd really like some platform to curate my news so that I live in an echo chamber and I'm not exposed to other points of view, right? So we've seen plenty of evidence that successful technologies that make people a lot of money arguably don't advance humanity.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I mean, I think what's kind of troubling is those companies essentially seized upon the fact that our how do I put this diplomatically? They seized upon the fact that human attention is fallible, and there's a lot that you can do in terms of making people addicted to things and addicted to consuming content. And then if you can monetize that, then you're essentially kind of seizing upon a flaw in human biology. And so I think there is definitely a concern around companies continuing to discover and seize upon those flaws to say, hey, how can we make people more entrenched in kind of, being addicted to content, being in those echo chambers? I think on the other hand, you will see companies that go, hey, we have evidence that this is not good in terms of people's outcomes, in terms of young people's outcomes, and so on. And we're going to create technology that kind of is built on different values. And I do think that we are already seeing a shift with consumers where they go, we are not going to use those platforms that take us into those echo chambers that cause addiction in kind of young people. And I think that will continue where you will then have these AI companies that are developing models and so on kind of have to move because consumer kind of demand and sentiment is changing. Yeah.
Well, that's an optimistic view, and I obviously hope you're right. I mean, I think that there's if there's money to be made, right, there's going to be
Mm,
companies that want to fill the gap, and as you said, playing on the fact that we're in some ways we're so unfamiliar with technology still as a
yeah.
species, right? We've got all this evolution behind us, and now we're being bombarded
Mm,
by this. And
mm,
just take a simple example. So we're used to taking our cues from body language, from visual cues, from voice.
mm.
If artificial intelligence can create highly accurate and convincing simulations of sound and video, which it most certainly can,
Which, yeah, yeah.
right? Aren't we fighting our basic human nature to sort of say, wait a second, this is fake? And we're going to it's going to be very hard for us to overcome that. I mean, look, I'm not here to make a case for regulation, but I'm here to make
Mm,
a case that we need more white hats than black hats
yeah.
out there right now.
I fully agree. I fully agree. And I do think that you're absolutely right. Technology is moving at a pace faster than kind of humans can discern. And I think that that is definitely kind of one of the things that keeps me up at night, so to speak. Yeah, you already have AI technology that can very easily be used to manipulate people in ways that they can't even discern. And to your point, having more people in the space that are good and that kind of and that kind of build in the ethics, the morals that kind of humanity has thrived upon. I think is going to be critical, and I think I think there probably needs to be a movement to get people who aren't just technologists closer to building and evolving these models. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, maybe there's a finally room for the person who did that philosophy degree after all.
Philosophy.
Right, actually, that finally pays off in the era of AI. You know, your mother said it was a waste of money, but you know what?
Look at me now, mom.
You should have been a programmer. It turns out, no good. No, we don't need those anymore. When you think about the corporate side of this, I mean, the sort of equivalent is this drive towards cost elimination as the first
Mm,
instinctive reaction, right? Now, look, let's not be naive. If you're a business and you're trying to achieve highly more efficiency and there's all this pressure to accomplish it, you'd be a
mm,
fool for ignoring the potential to essentially create efficiency within your organization.
yeah.
But I wonder whether it's just so reflexive, I should say, that you go off and you
Mm,
try and say new technology equals people elimination. And that sort of deprives you of the opportunity to start thinking in terms of how can you actually create growth and productivity from technology.
mm. Yeah, and I do think that I think the pattern that I typically see is you have executives in a position where they've been given a mandate or where they're under time pressure to deliver results quickly. And I think when you see that pattern, the natural answer is cost reduction or kind of chasing that headline or chasing the next quarter. I think I think when you do have kind of executives and leaders who either aren't in that kind of vicious cycle and have an opportunity to step away from it, or are in a corporate culture that kind of that where there isn't that pressure, I think then like the most successful ones go, okay, where do we want to be? And what is the gap between where our organization is now and where we want to be? And then what is the cost of complacency? And I think that's where you see companies really go, we need to focus on customer experience and you need to focus on value creation because that is ultimately what is going to kind of, make us relevant in 3, 5 years. Whereas the short termism is not going to make us relevant in 3, 5 years.
Do you see good examples now emerging of companies that are starting to think broader about this and start to see this the potential to deploy this for upside? I mean, you don't necessarily have to name names, but is there an emerging cadre of companies thinking a little beyond the whole notion of cost reduction? Of course, that's a big theme we want to explore in the conference.
But yeah, and I think, I mean, I'm not going to name them, but there's a company that I've been working with over the last couple of years, and they essentially emerged from kind of a cycle of transformation and cost reduction, where kind of, they'd done a lot to cut costs. They had new leadership in, and that new leadership was transformative in terms of, one, kind of laying out a strategy that was focused on value creation, but then two, saying we're going to thoughtfully implement technology and thoughtfully kind of implement AI where it makes sense to, with not just a focus on, okay, efficiency and cost reduction, but on fundamentally going, how do we create new value for our customers and for the organization? And so what they did was, and so this was a payments company, B2B payments. So they spent 3 months kind of with their and this was top leadership, CEO and C minus one, with customer service representatives, having weekly sessions, understanding the problems that their customer service representatives faced, and understanding how those customer service representatives drive loyalty and drive kind of value in their existing customer base. Because from a strategic perspective, one of the kind of main levers that have been identified is churn reduction. How do we reduce churn? And so what they ended up implementing was twofold. On the one hand, it was a predictive analytics system that predicted churn, that predicted which customers would lapse, but also predicted why, whether it was, it'd likely go to a competitor or so on, and then kind of gave the customer service representatives kind of predictive signals as to, okay, here's when you should reach out, because reaching out ahead of time is better than reaching out when they're kind of, when the contract is already over, and kind of what is the information that you should kind of, give them. But then the other side was treating your customer service representatives as a customer as well. How do you create an experience that gives them confidence when they're having these conversations? And so that meant surfacing the right information to customer service representatives as well. And kind of that fundamentally shifted how the company thought about kind of, who are our existing customers? How do we serve them? But then also, how do we make sure our customer service reps, who are that front line, are kind of, using the data and insights that we can discern from AI and these models in a way that kind of ultimately builds something that is, I guess, not as measurable, confidence. And I thought that was a really fascinating kind of, journey that the company went on, from pure focus on cost reduction to kind of, what I've just described. And I think the question that drove them was essentially, in 5 years' time, our customer is going to be happy with the level of personalization and the level of service that we give them today? The answer was no, and I think the answer for most companies is no. And then they went, what do we need to do now if we don't want to be in a situation in 5 years' time where we're playing catch up with everyone else?
That's, I mean, I think that's pretty far-sighted in part. I love your point at the end there saying they thought 5 years ahead, right? Which is a really interesting question to pose. I think it also reframes the conversation, because if you give yourself a bit of runway, right? If you say to yourself, all right, 5 years is a long enough period where we can change anything in the company. Pretty much everything's in play over a 5-year period. You sort of stop the debate as to whether or not, can we do it? Execution. We have the resources, right? Over 5 years, in a big enough company, anything's possible. But it's this mental switch towards then thinking about a future state which delivers much better outcomes for customers, but also importantly, this idea of engaging the employee base. This is going to be a challenge, isn't it? Because if we just go to people and say, hey, well, first of all, you've got a large part of your audience within the company thinking AI equals it's going to take your job. And by the way, they are bombarded with that message every single day, right? So AI is going to take your job. Hey, we've got a new AI project. Would you like to be part of it? We'd really like to explain how to make the machine more knowledgeable about how you do your work. We'd like to transfer some of your expertise to it. Who wants to sign up first? Right. And we're going to be surprised that employees' reaction to that are going to be, hell no.
Yeah.
So we've already got this negative sort of environment that we're projecting around this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We have to fight to overcome that, don't we? I mean, is the tone in which companies approach this and how they educate their employees is going to determine success for them. Because if they meet resistance, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think this is new either. I think for years, companies have been trying to implement AI tools and kind of AI models and receiving resistance from from employees. I work with an insurance company that kind of implemented kind of models to help their insurance service reps basically kind of give better recommendations to customers, and literally almost 0% adoption. They completely ignored the AI recommendation and went, no, I'm going to use the tools and the intuition that kind of I have, and that was a platform designed by engineers and data scientists. There was no work done to sit with the customer service reps to really understand what what are the frustrations day to day, what do they really actually need, because if they had done that and we had come in to essentially redesign and fix that, they would have understood that again, the customer service reps, it wasn't the accuracy of the recommendation that they had problems with. They had problems with things like being able to easily access kind of a customer's data when they when a customer called, and it was currently taking 10 minutes and they had to have sticky notes everywhere. And so ultimately, if you're bringing a technology that isn't solving those problems and you haven't designed this with your employees, you will get that rejection. And to your point, there's also a lot out there about AI taking jobs and so on. And kind of the organizations that I've worked with where they failed drastically in terms of trying to bring in AI tools and have employees adopt them, is when they had not done anything at all to kind of one, understand employee concerns, and then two, kind of start to not just educate employees but show them where kind of these tools could help them in their day to day, help them be better, but then also reassure them that kind of this isn't about replacing you, this is about kind of helping you do your job better. Yeah.
And there's a little different in the case of an AI technology. I appreciate your point that in some ways this is nothing new. We've had multiple waves of technology, and each wave has been accompanied by some job displacement. I mean, it's been inevitable. AI is a little different though, because if you think about the very at the heart of the concept of machine learning is learning, and if you want to build effective solutions, you have to engage the organization in an act of essentially teaching, right? In some ways, we are all transferring our knowledge to the machine. And it's not like you're putting in place, a payroll system. You switch it on, it works. Hopefully it does what it's expected to do. You switch on these systems, they are like a sort of 5-year-old child. They got great potential. It's very good, right? They need coaching. And if you want to be successful in bringing them up to their full potential, the organizational needs to see the potential in that. They need to see, wow, if we invest in this 5-year-old, we're going to end up with a super smart 20-year-old any day soon. And we're not even going to have teenage kid problems. That's worth an investment. But also, we want them to feel ownership for that investment. And this notion that you gave where frontline team members were involved in this seems like an oversight we've made in previous systems iterations. And we run the risk of doing the same this time. I'm fully on board with that. It just seems like it's a different mental state. What the example you gave was the long-term view, and also the employee engagement just seemed like two standout success factors.
But you're right in that I think what makes this kind of this time around different is that in some cases you are training the system with the knowledge from the humans that it will in some cases replace some of the tasks that they were doing. but I think that, I mean, we're already seeing instances of companies kind of, reversing some of the decisions they've made around kind of going all in on AI, replacing huge chunks of their workforce. Klarna is kind of, the most famous example right now, where, that was a combination of kind of, employee resistance, but also realizing that the technology that they kind of introduced wasn't as good as the humans it was replacing. And, exactly to your point, because the inherent knowledge that kind of, a lot of the humans possessed wasn't just around the kind of, the emails they sent and the kind of the actual outputs, but a lot of the kind of the intangible kind of, relationships they had and so on, and the ability to kind of understand um someone beyond just the email you've typed them to them. So I do think, again, the companies that approach this from a perspective of kind of, how do we see this as almost an ecosystem, and how do we make sure that kind of this is pushing towards outcomes that help employees, that help the organization, and not purely profit and efficiency. I think when you take that as your kind of, your foundation, I think you tend to kind of, think about, okay, what are the adoption programs that can bring in? How do we thoughtfully kind of, have people kind of, willingly contribute the knowledge that helps them, as opposed to kind of, just fully resist and be apathetic towards the change. Yeah.
Let's go to the other end of the spectrum, because whilst you might think, okay, there's resistance from frontline employees because they're fearful for their jobs, I could make an argument there's more resistance from leadership in companies
Yeah,
because
yeah,
they're inherently used to making decisions based on instinct, right? And pattern matching from previous careers. You hire
yeah,
somebody at the top of a company because they have experience, and many people interpret experience as simply pattern matching. Well, I've done this job before.
yeah,
My gut
yeah,
feel says do it this way. And now we're sort of introducing data sets. And first of all, a lot of companies have struggled with data driven decision making, period, right?
yeah,
It's just
yeah,
not their culture. Now we're
yeah,
introducing data sets that are not even showing people actuals, but now we're starting to show people prediction,
yeah. Predictions,
right?
yeah,
And the
yeah,
word prediction has these connotations in people's mind that means unsafe or
yeah,
unreliable,
yeah, yeah.
right? And so we're going to executives and saying, you want to make your choices, maybe choices that are counterintuitive for you
Mm,
based on algorithms that assign probabilities. I mean, that's going
mm.
to have a mixed reaction, right? I mean, we're going to see
Absolutely,
people
yeah, yeah, yeah.
resist that or go with it. I mean, it's going to really divide the next generation of leaderships. You could argue. You could argue.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I do think that, I mean, intuition absolutely has its place. I don't know of any company that makes decisions purely on data and not without kind of, leadership, kind of, using their experience, their expertise, the skills that they've developed over time. But I do think that, where I've seen leaders turn is where you explain to them that this is not about losing your intuition, but this is about scale. So, your intuition around kind of strategic direction, around, the needs of your organization, that's why you're there as a leader. But there's only kind of so much that you can do. You can have knowledge about 100 of your best clients, but you have 100,000 clients. The data, the predictive data, gives you that scale as a leader to combine with your intuition to go, okay, I am going to amplify myself, 10, 100-fold. And I think, the instances I've seen kind of, that light bulb turn on is when kind of I see leaders start to kind of, I guess, be less skeptical about the predictive modeling, about the predictive data, because they go, like, it's either I do nothing with these kind of, other customers, or I rely on the data and the insights there combined with my intuition to do something I otherwise wouldn't have at all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense to me. I mean, I think that we know that people have a lot of biases, right? We're
Yeah, yeah,
we're we're
yeah.
basically human, and so we have all our favorite biases. You pick the one you like the best. I mean, I think that you got a lot of confirmation bias is probably the biggest one I see in executive teams, right? And in an environment where we have these very natural human biases, probabilities are a bit of an alien concept for people to get their heads around, right? And at the end of the day, if we're talking about AI, we're talking about probabilities, right? A prediction is a probabilistic outcome. And we know that people have trouble understanding even probabilities, right?
That's true. Yeah.
And that's not exclusive to less well-educated people. In fact, I'd argue that it doesn't correlate to degree of education. This idea that if you say something's 60% likely to happen or 90% likely to happen, how do people interpret those numbers? How do they process this idea of lack of certainty, and how do they incorporate that into their decision making? And this is a whole generation of leadership. Remember, I mean, the guys running companies, probably my age, and if they grew up in business in an era where they made their successes, as you said, they got there because of hard work, dedication, people skills, intuition, an ability to read the room, right? All of these skills. And that was saying, all right, we've got this, all of these probabilistic outcomes that need to be injected into it. And without becoming a data science expert, you have to incorporate that into your thinking. I mean, let's say for the sake of argument, I don't believe this is true for an instant, the business schools start teaching this effectively today. We're still 20, 30 years away from seeing that show up.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I do think there's going to be a gap for a good while. And I don't see kind of a quick way of closing that gap. I do think that part of it is cultural. I think there are companies that have a culture of data-informed decision making across the organization, and those companies tend to use kind of the data and insight more so than others. But I remember reading a stat too that like in most organizations, a minimum of 55% of the data that they collect goes completely unused. Um, and I do think that like if you can build a bridge between here's the data that we have, here are the decisions that we're trying to make, and here are tools that essentially fill in the blind spots that you might have in your intuition or your experience to help you make better decisions. I do think that a lot of it is about essentially how you design that experience. Because I think a lot of the data we have is kind of very raw. You have dashboards, you have kind of tables and so on, which are hard to engage with and hard to like make real decisions using. So I do think this all comes again down to that experience that you're creating. Yeah.
Look, I actually think the point you're making on how AI can generate language and communication in much better ways, synthesize information, and right. I mean, this is partly why we've seen such an aha moment with generative technologies, right? You've got behind it a valuable engine and a large language model, but you have this natural language processing interface, which has made it seemingly more accessible. But I also wonder, the flip side of that is, if the presentation layer becomes much better, right? If the machine literally talks to you and says, okay, here's the answer, are we going to, in some ways, stop asking the question as to where did it get that answer from, right? Are we going to be seduced by the attractiveness of the information medium, right? And so all of a sudden it's a race to present bad ideas in beautiful and elegant ways, right? And so if the machine is extremely adept, and again, this is the danger, extremely adept at presenting ideas in a very natural kind of sounding way, then you do switch off the part of your brain that says, why is that true? Or the curiosity. When you see charts and data, I don't know about you, but what I immediately start to look at is, well, how's the axis designed, right? And okay, so I'm probably not typical of humans in that regard. But how am I being informed here? Is the calculation correct? But if that's taught to me in a very natural language kind of way, it's easier to understand, but it's also, in some ways, maybe it kills our skepticism that we need to have if we're going to be good at processing data and information sources. This is new territory, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think kind of it is a new paradigm around making information more accessible and more digestible by humans who ultimately communicate kind of with words. And so I do think that's kind of going to be a hugely powerful kind of like means in terms of creating interfaces for decision makers to translate, navigate the complexity of data and disparate data that they may have, and to connect it with what should I do or what could I do, and then help me understand the rationale, help me really, really kind of be able to use this insight in a meaningful way that aligns to my context. I do think that is kind of going to be a paradigm shift in terms of how we can understand and use data. And to your earlier point, like people of all walks struggle to understand numbers, probability data, and if you can make it more accessible, I think you can really change a lot around data and insight literacy. So.
Well, that's a great place for us to wrap up. I think it's an optimistic story. But one of the things I take away from this whole conversation is, like every wave of innovation, it's gonna create winners and losers, right? I mean,
True.
it's going to
Yeah.
amplify that, and maybe this is the greatest amplification. Maybe this is the greatest sorting we've ever seen since Harry Potter put on the hats. I mean, this could be the big sorting here, when companies over the next 5 years are really going to be separated out by the choices they make. And that's got to be an exciting idea, especially if you're on the right side of this, right? And you're
Yeah,
an
yeah,
advocate.
yeah.
So one final question before we wrap. Next year, we're talking about predictions. Where's Everton going to finish in the league? Because I think now we're going to see whether predictions really are useful or not.
Mhm.
What are we saying? Give me a number. Fifth. You heard it here first. No algorithms involved in creating that whatsoever.
No
That
AI.
human
Just heart.
human prediction with all of the actors. Tey, it's been absolutely fantastic. Really
It's been
enjoyed
a
talking
pleasure.
to you. Appreciate it very
Likewise.
much. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the CX Iconoclast from OCX Cognition. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss any of our thought-provoking conversations. And please get in touch if you want to learn more about what OCX Cognition's predictive CX analytics platform can do for your business by providing complete insights into every account, continuously updated and connected to operations. You'll find contact info in the show notes.